Hello, everyone. It is morning here, but good day to everyone wherever you are. My name's Imani Rupert-Gordon, and I'm the Executive Director for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. We are a national legal organization that works to achieve and advance civil and human rights for all LGBTQ people and our families. And I'm so excited to celebrate today with you because today is Lesbian Visibility Day, and which marks the end of Lesbian Visibility Week. And as one of very few organizations that was created to center the needs of LGBTQ women, NCLR is excited to have this talk today with this amazing panel. The panel today is titled We Are Everywhere, and it's a reminder to folks that LGBTQ women and non-binary folks are absolutely in every job, in every community, in every space on this planet. And we have some amazing leaders here that are leading in their respective areas. And we're going to talk about how they got there, what they've learned, and what they're doing to make it easier for all of us to be in positions like theirs. Before we get started in this discussion, just want to make a quick housekeeping note. There is a question and answer function. And while we expect to have a pretty full discussion, if you add questions here, if we can get to them, we absolutely will. And we'll see if we can try to weave them in some of our questions if possible. So feel free to send questions through. And now we are going to introduce our panelists. First, we have Jamie Grant, who is the project director for the National LGBTQ+ Women's Survey, the largest and most inclusive survey of its kind, specifically looking at the experiences of LGBTQ women who partner with women. And this is soon to be hosted at NCLR, so we're very happy. Thanks, Jamie, for joining us. Next, we have Ashlyn Johnson, the founder and president of Inclusion Playbook, a company that unites sports and social justice for change agents who want to transform their community in and through sports. Thanks, Ashlyn, for being here. Kimberly Veal, senior vice president of marketing and communication for the Golden State Warriors and WNBA Golden State. And we are excited to hear more about that. Thanks for being here, Kimberly. And then finally, Representative Zoe Zephyr of Montana. So excited to hear about your work today. And with that, we're going to get started. So first, Jamie, we are going to start with you. If you could start by introducing yourself, your name, your pronouns, and how you work in the service of making the world a better, safer, and more inclusive place for all of us.
Sure. Hi, Jamie Grant, she, her, hers. I've been out since 1984, which I'm pretty excited about. It's my 40th year being out as a lesbian. And how I make the world, I would say I'm a movement builder, and I'll say more about that as we go along. But I started out in anti-violence work, working as a young person in central Pennsylvania, running rape crisis and domestic violence shelters. Worked at the national level on LGBTQ, done it in academia. But I would always say that I do the same work no matter where I go. Doesn't matter what institution I'm in, I'm always really working for justice. So that's how I do it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Ashlyn, we're going to go to you next. So if you could just introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, and then talk about the work you're doing and how you're making the world a better and safer place for all of us.
Again, my name's Ashlyn. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the president founder of the Inclusion Playbook. We're a sports impact group that works with sports leagues and teams on their diversity, equity, inclusion work. I'm a civil rights lawyer and a former Division I basketball player. So as a lifelong athlete and a social justice advocate, I know the power that sports has to not only transform individuals, but communities as well. So in my role at the Inclusion Playbook, I work with community leaders to transform their communities in and through sports. So I use sports as a vehicle for social change around issues such as LGBTQ inclusion, reproductive rights, racial justice. I also work to create more inclusive spaces in sports for marginalized communities, especially LGBTQ youth and youth of color, so more kids have access to this impactful space of sports and the benefits that it provides.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ashlyn. Kimberly, we're going to go with you next. Introduce yourself, name, pronouns, and the work that you're doing to make the world a better and safer place for all of us.
Awesome. Hi, well, it's great to be here with everyone today. My name is Kimberly Veal, she, her, hers, and currently the SVP of Marketing and Comms with WNBA Golden State. And I think, just answering that question right out of the gate, working within the WNBA, I've got I spent 6 years with the Seattle Storm prior to joining the Warriors. And obviously, you know, sports is such an interesting place where we create safe spaces and really build advocacy and community. And we are so excited to be able to do just that with our new WNBA team here in the Bay Area. You know, and obviously advocating for and celebrating individuals across all walks of life, and certainly the LGBTQ community.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. We're super excited about that. And Representative, you are the last to introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, and what you're doing, how your work is making the world a better and safer place for all of us.
Yeah, my name is Zoe Zephyr. I am the state representative in Montana for Montana's 100th House District, pronouns she, her. And my work is focusing on we know that there are so many policies and laws that impact our day-to-day lives, that create the environments of fear, create environments where discrimination can run rampant. And my job is to fight in the state of Montana to pass policies that keep LGBTQ people safe, to fight back against policies that impact us, sometimes directly with laws targeting our community, sometimes indirectly. You know, making sure our public education system has funding, looking to address youth homelessness, because we know the way that impacts our communities. And then when I'm not in session, I work with legislators around the country to try to make sure that we are fighting these fights together. Because we know that so many times the people who target and attack LGBTQ people do so in a way to make us feel isolated and alone. And that is how fear gets fostered. So I work with lawmakers and activists across the country to try to make sure that we feel connected in this fight, and that when we push for our rights, we are pushing in unison, both as LGBTQ people and also with the communities that are in resonance with us. You know, people fighting for disability rights, people fighting for equal opportunities in housing, sports advocacy, that are litany of issues.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm really excited to get into this discussion. So often we talk about how freeing it is to live our lives openly and authentically in our place of employment. And honestly, this is one of the things that I certainly am most grateful for in my life. But sometimes we leave out the parts about this that can be a bit difficult. And I'm wondering, have you had any negative experiences coming out in professional settings? What was that like for you? And then what did you learn from that experience? Let's get started this time with Ashlyn.
Yes, a long time ago when I came out, my first experience was very negative. I was living in the South, in a progressive Southern city, and I was working at an HBCU. And my boss, when she realized that I was gay, she wanted me to resign or she would fire me. And at this point, I was right out of college, and I remember saying, you know, it's illegal for you to fire me, so I'm not going to resign. And so then I called Lambda Legal, I called the ACLU, where I was informed that it was not illegal to fire someone because they were gay. And so that was really shocking for me. But what they did tell me is that the city had an ordinance that they wanted to use my case as a test case for, to show that it had no teeth and therefore was ineffective. So for about a year, I worked with the ACLU to kind of highlight the ineffectiveness of their LGBTQ protections in employment. And after that, I remember saying, I'm going to just write one more letter and then I have to let this go and move on with my life. And so while that experience was frustrating, it did help me realize that, one, I hadn't actually done anything to promote my own rights or even learn about them before this experience. So I felt like, you know, part of me felt kind of like I was kind of a part of the problem because I didn't educate myself or do any work around LGBTQ civil rights. And what I also realized is that the people that I saw who had the most power to do things at that point were the lawyers. And I wanted to have that type of power so something like that didn't happen to me ever again. So after that incident, I decided to go to law school, where I could become a civil rights attorney that focused on LGBTQ rights. So again, while it was frustrating, it did kind of ignite my passion to do more LGBTQ work. And so again, while it was an awful situation, I got to see what the limitations of the law were and personally experience them as well. So I do think that, something really good came out of it. And I'm in a place where now I know I will never work anywhere where I cannot be out. And two, I will continue to work for more people to have those rights as well.
Thank you so much, Ashlyn. Kimberly, we're going to go with you next. So we often talk about like how what it feels like to work and live in our lives and work authentically at work. And I'm wondering if you've had any negative experiences in your professional settings, and then what was that like for you, and what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, so I'll kind of answer the question in a little different way. For me, I started my career in an organization that was super accepting. A lot of individuals who were very confident in who they were, very established. And so for me, I'm like, oh, great, I fit right in. There's really no news here. Let's all just keep it moving. And then I joined an organization that was much bigger. And I was the new person coming in, and I kind of lost a little bit of my sense of confidence. I wasn't sure how it was going to be received. And so while the ultimate experience of coming out was not negative in any way, shape, or form, that the journey that I went on was all in my own head and I started to work myself up of like, how is this going to go? Is this going to have any impact either now or in the future? And I was kind of sitting at this interesting intersection between, the realities of women's sports versus men's sports. And again, all in my head, like it wasn't anything that anybody else did, but it was just me sitting here and evaluating and candidly overthinking, how this was going to go and really working myself into a stalemate of like, well, I'm never going to do this because I feel like I have so much to risk, even though when I did ultimately get over that barrier internally, which I know we have a question on mentorship coming up, but that was a huge piece of that journey for me. The experience was so freeing, so worth it. And ultimately, looking back, something that I was like, well, I had nothing really to worry about, and wish that I had done sooner. But the reality is that journey took the amount of time that it needed to take for me at the time when I was younger, and just really trying to get my footing and kind of weigh the pros and cons, which, ultimately ended up being, not a lot of cons in that process.
And thank you so much. Representative, we're going to go with you next. Have you had any negative experiences coming out in professional settings? What was that like for you? And then what did you learn?
No, it's really super easy. No, I think one of the interesting things I was the first trans woman elected to public office in the state of Montana. And what comes with that is people, you're outed sort of as you're walking into the workplace, and outed in a way that is public. And it led to my first day of orientation. It led to Republican lawmakers, Republican women having a meeting, a closed door meeting, asking about what they were going to do about the thing in the bathroom. And so, I have faced that. What also I think we see is in a space like, and this is true of all jobs, but I think particularly in a workplace like the legislature, where you have to work on 1,000 different issues with other legislators, is you will have someone come in and say, LGBTQ people do not belong in this state, and you have to fight back against hateful claims like that. And then 10 minutes later, you are aligned with them on a housing policy, and you have to talk with them and get their support on a housing policy. And so you find yourselves faced with pain and then having to both compartmentalize it without absolving them of cruelty. And I think for me, that became one of the tricky balances, because you would get that. You would get someone saying something horrible, and then having your back on another bill. You would get people saying very cruel things, and then they would come up to you afterwards and say, you know how it is. This is just politics. Like, I love you individually. I support you individually, but I don't think, you know, a lesbian should have her wife's picture up at school if she's a teacher. Like, that's what I don't want to see, but I love you. And how do you function, get the work done that you need to do for the people in your state without sort of yielding or allowing people to acquit themselves of cruelty? That has been one of the large challenges for me. It's one I hoped I've handled with grace and aplomb, but it clearly manifested in large ways in the legislature with my censure as well.
Thank you so much for your honesty there, Representative. Really appreciate it. Jamie, I want to ask you the same question. Have you had any negative experiences coming out in professional settings, and what did you learn from those experiences?
First, I just want to say I'm very moved by the sharing of all three of my panelists. So I'm emotional, which is good because it's Lesbian Visibility. I mean, lesbians are emotional. But, you know, in 1984, I came out to my family and was disowned. So jobs were really pretty important. So I had no net. So in 1985, I'm a rising star at Bucknell University. I'm probably going to be development director in their, you know, advancement program in another year. But I come out because there's so much sexism, racism, and anti-Semitism swirling around every day. People are saying unbelievable 1980s everyday things to each other in my presence. And I feel like I can't say anything because the lesbian is stuck in my throat, if you know what I mean. So I just couldn't get out of bed one day, came to work, came out, and then I was immediately like put in the mailroom, if you know what I mean. It was obvious I was not going to get the development director job. So I decided to get my master's there on a year-long fellowship and open their women's center. Good move. And the faculty says I have to be closeted to do that. You know, some of the lesbian faculty was closeted, of course, to survive in central Pennsylvania in 1985. Say I have to be closeted to do that, which I did not do. So in 1986, when I finished there, I go to run a rape crisis center in central PA. And I want to talk about this because once you're sort of politicized and out and working for justice, it affects everything else, which is that there was a lot of power and control stuff that people at the shelter had internalized and were actually using to get women in the system to do things that were just not okay, including having affairs with them. So here I am in a movement setting that I love, so I have to come out about that. So I lose that job. So then I come to the task force in 1990 at the heat of the AIDS crisis. Irva Shivad hires me and really changes my life. And I have an amazing time there, but I'm exhausted. And I make my way to the Union Institute Center for Women, which I think is more of a recovery job, sort of running an academic activist women's center. And I immediately do a fundraiser for Estrella, which is an underwear party. Hey, everybody was doing underwear parties in the 90s. And immediately there's a campaign to fire me there for doing an underwear party, which I survive. And then just because I'm, you know, not getting it, in my newsletter, I cover a polyamory workshop that I do at the National Women's Studies Association, campaign number 2 to fire me. And I survived both of those campaigns because the straight old Irish guy who runs the Union Institute says to me, I really can't believe how much people hate you. Like the hate is so outsized to what you're doing. I can see that it's just wrong, right? You know, the underwear party, it's just that I'm being myself, right? And that I'm fully inhabiting my politics and I'm just being myself in the world, and it is driving people crazy. So fast forward to the task force, I go back in 2007, great place to work both times, but we're in an austerity situation and I lose $20,000 of my salary in 1 year. I'm a solo earner now. I have 2 kids and I have to leave. I'm running the Policy Institute. I do the National Transgender Discrimination Survey there. One of the most important things I've ever done in my life. But I can't stay because, and I think this is another thing, our movement organizations are so impacted by, the vagaries of support, right? So I go to the ARCA Center for Social Justice Leadership at Kalamazoo College. They had me at endowed center. I don't have to raise money anymore. I'm a big cheese on campus. I hire a fantastic trans activist. I train everyone about how to have their first trans staffer, and they fire them for having a history of sex work. So has anybody read the trans study that they were so excited I did? No, apparently nobody's read it. So I have to leave with my family, go back across the country to DC then. And I want to say a lesbian and a gay man led that campaign against us, which again, the sex phobia in our communities, which I've been fighting since I was a young person. In many of these cases, it's been the good guys who have been, running these campaigns. So my very last work in the movement, I become the executive director of PFLAG in 2017, and I get a huge grant to start Black and Latinx led chapters because they're 92% white chapter led, which is what I said I would do in my interview. And they fire me for being too activist, which I've never said publicly, but is exactly what they said to me in my exit. And they trashed the grant so that they wouldn't have to make the change. So what I want to say is, being a lesbian for me since 1984 and being out, that I'm so grateful for, is that I've just lived my values. And when we get to the mentorship piece, I mean, I've had unbelievable mentors who have shown me that way and that path. And I've had a fantastic singular life. And, the workplace has not daunted me, but I have to say, NCLR is a critical place in our movement. My last firing was 2017. My first one was 1985. For basically pursuing justice on the job in different ways. And we can see it today happening all around us. This is no joke.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and thank you so much to all of our panelists. I think it's important. Often we shy away from talking about the negative experiences we've had in our work and talking about what it looks like after we've made it and after we've gotten through things. But I think it's important for us to recognize that we all have a different path of doing our work and different experiences, and that the folks that are sometimes the people that help us and sometimes the people that hurt us aren't always the people that we would imagine. And so to recognize that the ways that oppression happens, it's not just so often, I've heard people say things like, you must not experience racism in the LGBTQ community because people understand, because LGBTQ people understand what it's like to be oppressed. But we realize that's not how oppression works, not even close. And so really to recognize that we're all going to have our different path, and that's going to be true of everyone that's experiencing that's coming out in whichever setting. But I think it's helpful for us to continue to have conversations about what it looks like for us, so we remember that it's different for everyone. I want to get into this next question because so many folks have mentioned it, but I wanted to talk about how mentorship plays a role in your life. We know that it's so important, and I'm wondering if you've had a mentor or you've been a mentor and what that's meant for you. And so, Kimberly, I was hoping that we could start with you for this one.
Yeah, certainly. So yes, I have been fortunate to be both a mentor and a mentee. I think, obviously, as a mentor, learning so much from the individuals that I mentor has been so impactful in my career across different sectors of industries, age, be it whatever it is. I think so many of us are so busy and don't oftentimes allot time for this. And for me, it's something that pouring into it has helped shape how I think and view things, different perspectives, safe spaces to have conversations. So just generally speaking, it's something that, I find a lot of value in. To dive a little deeper, for me, I mentioned this earlier, but I've had a couple mentors along the way who are the reason why my career is where it's at. And I, as an individual, have gained the confidence that I have to be who I am in certain settings. And so not to go too deep into it, but you know, that those relationships and the ability to ask for help and have an opportunity to share freely. Here's what I'm thinking. Here are my concerns. Here's what I'm worried about, and gain different perspectives and feedback on why I might be looking at it, or just even the opportunity to offer new ways of thinking about things has been so helpful. And it took me a while to get to a place where, you know, I was not just hearing you, but I was actually metabolizing what I was receiving and buying into it. And maybe that's just because I'm dense, but or stubborn. But you know, once that trust was established and I was able to you know, take it at face value, be a little vulnerable, and understand that they had my best interest in mind, it obviously has changed my life. So you know, a couple of key takeaways there, but I think overall it's something that I would encourage as many people as possible to give time into, you know, either up or down, whichever the scenario is, and hopefully you gain as much as you give from those situations.
I love that. Thank you so much, Kimberly. And it's so incredible what you're able to receive once you make yourself vulnerable. I'm so glad that was your experience. Thanks for sharing. Representative, we're going to go with you next. How does mentorship play a role in your life?
Yeah, you know, I think about the different stages, the way that like mentorship has to pair with the moment that you're in. And I think, you know, when I was first coming out, you know, there hadn't been a bisexual woman in our legislature who was out. There hadn't been a trans woman in our legislature who was out. And quite frankly, I had not known of an older trans woman just anywhere in life. And so that was a piece where I didn't know what it would mean to be that. And so I felt myself sort of desperately searching for a mentor, and then hoping that, you know, when I came out, maybe I could be that down the road for somebody. When it came to day-to-day mentorship in work, I met with my senator at the time, who was the first openly gay man to serve in the legislature, as well as I was Senator Bryce Bennett, and then also Senator Diane Sands, who was the first lesbian to serve in the Montana legislature. And they helped me understand sort of what it would mean to be a first in these spaces, what it would mean to navigate hostility, navigate tokenization. How do you move through there? I also found a lot of mentorship from, again, communities whose fights are in resonance with ours. You know, in Montana, the American Indian Caucus was exceptional at saying, hey, we know the long history of how they attempt to, you know, target us in every aspect of our lives. When they come after you, we will be there to make sure you know how to stand up for yourselves, make sure that we're standing and fighting back with you. In campaigning, other trans women who had been elected before me, I think of, you know, Representative Brianna Titone or Taylor Small from Colorado and Vermont, respectively, who, you know, when you've knocked doors for 8 hours and you're exhausted and, you know, last door conversation was awkward, you go home sad and you call them, and they helped uplift me and make sure I knew what I was doing, and had the confidence to sort of keep forward in the sort of black box that is a, you know, 8-month political campaign. I've had the pleasure of other legislators across the country, you know, senior legislators in our state who have helped me. And then after, you know, the censorship, and suddenly there was a national profile, I had folks who really helped me figure out what it would mean to navigate that and the impact that that has on your day-to-day life. I met with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was incredibly instrumental in helping me feel grounded in the spotlight, you know, and how do you move through that. Kelly Robinson, Executive Director of HRC, has been a wonderful friend to me in helping me say, okay, here's what it looks like to fight at the national level, and here's sort of how to do it in a sustainable way. Chasten Buttigieg, gay man married to Secretary Pete Buttigieg, they have young kids, and talking about what it means to be a family in these situations. I'm marrying my fiance, and we'll have an 8-year-old stepson, and talking to him about family and family well-being in the political spotlight. To me, each of those, there has been no one person who could be the, role model in the sky that's like, here's the mentor who has shaped how I move through the world. But each of them has a special experience that is in resonance with my own sort of journey, and making sure that I'm leaning on them every step of the way. And also, because we're in this panel, and I'm so excited to be here with sports folks, the first bill I ever testified on was a trans sports ban, and I was, fighting against it. Prior to my transition, I was a 5-time state wrestling champion, and my coach was a huge mentor. And I think if anyone left me with something, we had in our wrestling room a sign on the exit that said, every day I leave this room a better wrestler and a better person than when I entered. And my coach, who was a youth pastor, he would say, if you don't feel like you've become a better wrestler, stay behind. We'll drill on it. We'll work through the kinks. We'll help you, make sure you know what you're doing. If you don't feel like you've become a better person, stay behind. We'll talk it out. We'll help you figure out how to move forward in your life. And I am, years past competing in sports, but that notion of every day I work to be a better person is a lesson I've carried with me since my time as an athlete. And it's one of the reasons I fight so hard for inclusion in sports.
Thank you so much. I love that. And I also really have an appreciation for this way that you seem to walk through the world, where you really think that everyone has something to teach you, which I think we all can get something from. So thank you so much for sharing that. Jamie, we're going to go with you next. How does mentorship play a role in your life?
Well, one of the things I'd say about the era I came out in that I feel super grateful for was it was just such a really vibrant time for lesbian feminist theory, art, organization making. So like the late 70s in college, and then the early 80s. And when I came to DC, well, actually in the 80s in Pennsylvania, I was really interested in I'd grown up during desegregation in Boston, and I grew up in an Irish enclave that was very anti-Black, and I had a feeling there were other ways to be in Boston in that era, and that it had been hidden from me, that there were actually Irish women who were working on desegregation in community. So I started researching it, and I found out about the Combahee River Collective, and I started doing research, and it brought me to Barbara Smith, who is, wrote Towards a Black Feminist Criticism in 1974 and changed the whole freaking world. And she just, because I was doing this research, she just came into my life. I mean, unbelievably. I mean, she's my kid's chosen great auntie, or whatever you want to say now. She's been in my life this whole time. And so when I did that litany of firings, I've had Barbara Smith in my life, my whole life, and watched her change everything and be, disparaged in just every arena you could see. I went to the Ford Foundation with her once, and they just treated her like, I can't even tell you, while Kitchen Table Women of Color Press was changing everything. So having her take me on and watching her navigate, and I want to say, for someone who's been so life-changing for so many of us, we're crowdsourcing her retirement fund. Again, just want to say, this is the reality of lesbian trailblazers, right? A whole bunch of us are crowdsourcing her retirement fund because she's a movement person, right? She also, institutions have not been much of a home for her while she's changed everything. So I think Barbara, and then in the 90s when I got to DC, Minnie Bruce Pratt was here and she just lost both of her kids. She's very connected to NCLR around writing about that experience, about coming out and having her kids taken from her. And writing amazing poetry. If you haven't read Crime Against Nature, absolutely an amazing book. But I think these two women who were, 10, 15 years older than me and really created the lesbian world I stepped into, watching them move through with dignity and be undeterred at every single step, that no matter what stupid organization let go of me or had something to say about me living my values and pushing on whatever they were behind on, I just kept going. And having that example, having it every day now, it's just given me my whole life. So I do think lesbians are really good at finding our people, and I just am so grateful for it, because it's been the difference between being really buried in so much institutional discrimination and staying on my path.
Thank you so much, Amy. And Ashlyn, what about you? How has mentorship played a role in your life?
I like to think that being a mentor keeps me young, but having a mentor keeps me sane. And when I wanted to go to law school, like no one in my family had ever gone to grad school at all, especially like no one's gone to law school. I had great mentors to like help me figure out how to apply, how to assess which programs I should go into. I had classmates who were talking about clerkships. I had no idea what clerkships were. So I was just kind of behind when I got into law school, and I was able to have mentors to kind of help me navigate that space, just donating a lot of their time to get me to where I needed to be. I discovered that I needed a different type of mentor when I graduated from law school and started working in the civil rights space. It's been mentioned on this panel that, the LGBTQ rights space, for the most part of when I worked in it, was very predominantly like cis gay white men. And as a queer Black woman, it was sometimes difficult to navigate some of those spaces. And having mentors that were able to kind of like validate my reads of situations was extremely helpful. Or managing microaggressions. Like, I'm from the South, so I understand how to manage like direct, let's say, discrimination or where there's intent to hurt someone. But when it came to microaggressions, I would question, like, did that really happen? Like, am I reading into the situation? And so it made it hard for me to trust myself and trust my instincts. Having a mentor there, especially another Black woman who could say, hey, this is why that might be happening. Here's how you can address it in a way that's like productive, extremely helpful. And so it's just been invaluable to me professionally and personally, and allowed me to stick to my passions in times where I was thinking like, maybe DC isn't the space for me. I had a mentor who always had my back to let me know like, some of these things are normal. Some of these things are not just all of you. And here's how you can work in a space in an impactful way.
Thank you so much, Ashlyn. Something that I read years ago that has really been helpful for me is this idea that you have mentors that are both older than you and also having mentors that are younger than you. And that has been something that has been incredibly helpful because there is a level of understanding that I don't have for folks that have much more experience than I do, or folks that have an experience that I no longer have access to. And I feel like that's something that's been super, super helpful. Thanks so much, everyone, for sharing this. I wanted to get into something towards the end of our discussion here. We often hear the phrase, I'll be the first, but not the last. But we know that that is easier said than done. And I'm wondering, what are you doing right now actively to make it easier for folks to really following your footsteps? How are you leaving the door open, creating pipelines, and finding ways to make it easier for folks like us to be in roles like yours? Representative, we're going to start with you first.
Awesome. I think there's some really straightforward conversations, particularly in the political space, around meeting with candidates who have expressed interest in campaigning, making sure they understand the ins and outs of fundraising, door knocking, etc. But I think there's a broader question here. And, I often talk to folks who say, hey, I really want to get involved. I want to fight somehow, but I could never, be a policymaker. I could never do the legislature. And I consider like, how do you help people, make sure you're not the last, is less about saying, oh, hey, you should run for office. I should get you to run for office, but rather helping people figure out how to identify the spaces where their voices can do the most good. For some folks, that's the legislature. That would be doing policy work. For some folks, it's lobbyists or working at a nonprofit. For some folks, it is like being out and proud in a non-work setting, and that is their space. And so what I try to focus my efforts on are helping people figure out ways to identify what is the room your voice can do the most good in, and then how do you do it sustainably? Because I often talk to folks who are like, I lobbied the legislature for a year and oh man, that was soul crushing, and I'm just hands up backing away. And so talking to folks about very specific strategies, for me, making sure you have hobbies that do not intersect with the work and have completable end states. I paint, and there is something about having an art piece that you can do that is finished in a few hours. And then, when I finish an art piece, the governor can't veto it. He's not coming in going, that is never going to be a piece. There's not someone, an activist on the ground who's going to say, you painted with 4 colors, you should have used 12 colors. And I'm going to be like, no, this was just for me. It's unrelated to anything we're doing, and it's done. And that I have found to be emotionally recharging and helps me as I step back into the work. So helping people identify what are those things for them, and then also how do you get into these spaces? I had a activist when I got started in my activism, who we described our dynamic as she would kick the door down and I would convince you that you invited us in. And that, to me, helping people figure out how do you do that on a practical level? What does it mean to ask the right questions, to steer and pivot conversations, to make sure folks feel like, even if you weren't inherently or initially welcomed in that space, how do you move through a conversation so that by the end of it, people are like, oh, actually, I'm really glad that you were here. And actually, I think I'm going to invite you to the next room over as well so that you can do the work there. And that, to me, when I think about not being the last, I would love to have another out bi woman in the legislature. I'd love to have another out trans woman in the legislature. But more important than that to me is making sure those folks find the room they feel called to be in. And that's how I do that work.
I love that. Thank you so much. Kimberly, we're going to go to you next. How are you leaving the door open and creating pipelines so it's easier for folks to do the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, so I think a little bit of what I was going to touch on was just shared in terms of making sure that if you're the person to bring somebody into the room, give them a seat at the table, that you're doing that. But just to offer a different perspective, the other piece of this in sports is education and awareness around with our fan base, and reaching out and offering those resources, whatever the case may be, to the individuals that are coming to the game, the individuals that are engaging with us on social media and ingesting our content, and how are we leveraging our platforms to do good in those spaces. And so I think we see that a lot across all sorts of different activations and initiatives in sport. Obviously, Pride Night or the various iterations of whatever it's called across the country have gone well, haven't gone so well. There's been, case studies and examples on both sides of that ball, probably depending on market, but that's a different conversation. And so how are we, right now thinking about those individuals in the community and how we're supporting them through the activations? How is the team advocating for them? And then for people who maybe aren't part of the community but want to know more information on how they can support. How are we also offering those resources and those spaces for those folks as well?
Thank you so much. Ashlyn, we're going to go with you next. How are you leaving the door open and creating pipelines so that folks can get into the work that you're doing?
Yeah, with creating a pipeline, it's really important in the sports and social justice space because it's kind of a new space with more sports leagues doing DEI work. And so you'll have a lot of young students who love athletics and they love social justice, but they don't know really how to get into the space. So we try to provide internships and fellowships, especially for athletes who want to do social justice work. And so that's one way that we're helping build the pipeline, because what's going to happen is they'll go off and get jobs, maybe with the Warriors. And then we could actually, figure out how do we expand the work in other spaces. So we aren't always the consultants doing the work, but that organizations finally have a pipeline of people who are skilled in doing this work. And the second thing is I just try to be the best at my job, because there's a lot of stereotypes around Black women business owners and Black women leaders. And there's this pressure that if you fail, it closes the door for the people behind you. We know that Black women business owners don't have as much access to startup capital. We don't get invited to be a part of incubators or have the official mentorship programs. So I also try to mentor other consultants, especially women of color who are trying to either like start their own consultancy or start a business. I have plenty of mistakes to share with them. So hopefully they won't make the same mistakes, but yeah, just that approach of like creating pathways directly through internships. Also having an example of like what it's like to be a successful Black woman in this space. And then just providing advice to people who want to do this type of work as well.
Thank you so much, Ashlyn, and for specifying that the difference when you're talking about intersections of identity. I appreciate that. Jamie, we're going to go to you next. How are you leaving the door open and creating pipelines so it's easier for folks to get into the work that you're doing?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think I feel really lucky because my mentors showed me right away that they were partnering with me, not sort of talking down to me. And I think that's probably been my best thing. I mean, I don't really think of myself as a mentor. I have partnerships across generations that I've had for, many, many years, and starting when these folks were very young in the movement. One of the spaces I have worked in consistently is the Creating Change Conference for the last 30 years. And I've run the sexual liberation track there for 15 years. And I raise the money for it, and then I do the programming and recruit the faculty. So, I mean, I've really recruited very consciously of people of color, majority faculty, many gendered faculty, so that we could push away the idea that the sexual liberation piece is always sort of cis and white and, the purview of gay men, right? So we've done something really different there. And now I have 30 people who are all younger than me who've been on that faculty for years. And they also now have relationships with those donors. They have relationships with all the organizations that come. Many of them have built their own businesses. Many of them have built their own nonprofits doing sexual liberation work in other places. It's very hard work to get funded and to sustain yourself on. But this group of people like me are very passionate about it as sort of the prow of the ship for us in our movement. So that's one way. But I loved what Zoe said about somebody kicking the door down and the other person acting reasonable. But with one mentor I have, Jack Harrison Quintana, who was my intern at the task force when I was there in 27, and I moved him into my office because we had so much to say to each other. I couldn't have him down the hall, and everybody was like, well, what is this? Why is this, and then, all the Policy Institute books I published those years, his name was on the cover, not in the acknowledgements. Super important in terms of mentorship. Everybody who's worked with me on a major publication, this new survey, I have 8 co-authors, right? Putting your partners who are doing incredibly hard work out front with you rather than somehow, on the back pages is another really important way to do mentorship. But after the trans study published, we got global funding to help people all over the world figure this out, and I brought my mentees with me, and then they got big jobs doing human rights work. So, you know, it's like, think of your mentees as partners. And really, they changed all my thinking about the movement as I've gone. As you said, I think, Imani, you were saying, it's like, I don't have access to their generation and what the thinking is there and what they're moving on. And so I feel like it's helped me not become ossified in the movement around my politics, right? My politics have grown the whole time I've been in there, and I can actually have a conversation with my 16-year-old who's queer, you know, and we're in similar places because I've had young people in conversation with me the whole time. So, yeah, our mentees are our partners.
That. Thank you so much, everyone. So we just have a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask just a final word. So if you could just take a minute or less and answer, if folks could take away one thing from this discussion, or what does visibility mean in 2024, what would that be? And Jamie, we're going to start with you. Oh, and Jamie, you're on mute.
I think we're in another huge movement moment, nationally, globally. And I think we have to figure out who we want to be as queers in this moment. I mean, I really know who I want to be. And I definitely want to be supporting these young people who are trying to tell us something about how out of step the world is with them. And, you know, I'm excited about all the energy that's out there on the ground right now. I think it's crucial. And I think it's going to further our liberation as LGBTQ people and as human beings.
Thank you. Ashlyn, we're going to go with you next. What does visibility mean in 2024? Or if participants could take away one thing from this discussion, what would you want that to be?
Participants can take away one thing. I would want it to be like the small things matter too. I used to think that in order to be impactful, I had to do something like really big, like solve world hunger or build a school or something like that. What I've learned is that the small things matter too and can have a big impact down the road, be it something seemingly small like being out and proud or being a role model or taking time to answer the call from someone who wants some type of advice or mentorship. Even if you don't see the impact immediately, even these seemingly small things matter too.
Love that. Thank you so much. Kimberly, what about you? What does visibility mean in 2024? Or if participants could take away one thing from this discussion, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, I think takeaways for me and for hopefully everybody is just the power of this community. I know it's a super broad statement, but as we think about the individuals that are working, and Ashlyn, as you kind of mentioned, like all the things that we're doing across different sectors, professionally, personally, to make this world a better place, and to really create space and opportunity for everybody. We are so strong together. And so how can we, you know, bounce ideas off of each other or help each other if we need, you know, hitting roadblocks, whatever the case may be. This community is a force and there's a lot of leverage behind it.
Thank you so much. And Representative, last question for you. What does visibility mean in 2024? Or if participants could take away one thing from this discussion, what would you want that to be?
You know, I'm thinking of, you know, because Jimmy was talking about poetry earlier. I did my undergrad in poetry, and I was thinking about the way my professor talked about how language seems to die the more you use it, how it loses sort of the power. Metaphor, if you use the metaphor again and again and again, it doesn't seem to strike the way it does initially. And I think when we think about visibility, it can be easy to talk about it in, you know, first person to do X, Y, or Z, or, you know, now we're out in public in these various spaces. I think it's important that first and foremost, the visibility is a deeply personal thing. It is turning to ourselves in the mirror and saying, I know who I am. I love who I am. I am proud of who I am. And not letting a world that wants to push us back in the closet, that wants to tell us you're not going to have a job, you're not going to be able to get that initial capital if you are out, that we turn and we say, no, I know. And that light will not go away. I think that is what I see as a deeply important aspect of visibility in today's framework. I also am thinking in the way in which, Ashlyn talked about things being at a very individual level, or at the, like, you can do the small work, you don't have to build a school, as you said. And I think we've been hitting on that in a variety of ways through our conversations today. And I think what I would say is the takeaway should be that every space matters. We fight in every space. I often say, if the people targeting LGBTQ rights could snap their fingers and make us all disappear, we would be back again the very next moment, because we're not just in your communities, we are part of what it means to be a community. And similarly, if every queer person could magically move to one specific location where we'd all be loved and accepted, some big happy LGBTQ commune where everything was perfect, LGBTQ people would still show up in every other space in the world. It's why we fight in spaces like Montana, in spaces like Florida, in conservative countries across the world, because we are in all of these spaces. And we fight at the large scale in our politics, we fight in our sports, we fight in the streets as we walk through the world, and be proud to be ourselves. So find that space, and regardless of what scale it is at, know that it is important, and ultimately it is how we change the world.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our brilliant panelists for sharing your stories and your experiences with us today. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and being able to be present. Remember, you can find out more about the National Center for Lesbian Rights at nclrights.org. Thank you again so much for being here, and happy Lesbian Visibility Day to everyone. Whether you're visible or not, you are valued. We appreciate you. Take care.